Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism and antagonism and difficult, toxic people, relationship, and situations. So here's a question for you. Can narcissistic people experience narcissistic abuse? So that's meant to be one of those kinds of upside down questions. And the answer to that is, believe it or not, yep. I was looking at some data today for a project I'm working on, and interestingly, what the data showed me is that people who have narcissistic personalities, or even those who even meet criteria for the personality disorder, can experience narcissistic abuse. And you may be thinking, say what? Isn't that just the snake swallowing its tail? No, it's actually not. And when I saw the data like that, I stopped and I thought, let me think on that, because obviously, yes, I've seen it happen. The patterns of a narcissistic relationship: invalidation, manipulation, gaslighting, not being seen, not being heard, not being recognized, they're not good for anyone. And I mean anyone. And that also means people who have a narcissistic personality style. We know that narcissism is on a continuum from milder, when the mild narcissism looks almost more like an emotionally stunted adolescent presentation, all the way to severe, like we would see in malignant narcissism, or just someone who is really, really devoid of empathy, almost bordering in the realm of what might even look more like psychopathy. As you could imagine, a person with a more severe narcissistic style could get into a relationship with someone with a milder narcissistic personality. And that person with the milder narcissistic personality can, and likely will, experience all the fallout of narcissistic abuse. In fact, it may even look and feel a little worse. If a person with a narcissistic personality style gets into a relationship with someone who is also narcissistic, you can guarantee that that relationship is going to have more volatility, more dysregulation, more of a tendency to personalize, lots of ego injuries. So the escalation can do tremendous harm to the less dominant and sort of comparably less narcissistic person, as well as to other people who are around the relationship. And that person experiencing the abuse will have all the patterns of confusion, helplessness, anxiety, rumination, and all the rest that we see in these relationships. However, we may see a little less of the self-blame stuff, but we'll still see a lot of the rest of it. People with narcissistic personalities are actually quite likely to be drawn to each other. The grandiosity, charm, charisma, attractiveness, extroversion, success, it makes sense. But alas, and I have worked clinically with people who are narcissistic, who are experiencing narcissistic abuse, it's painful for them. And the diminished insight that goes along with narcissistic personality, they just don't self-reflect, it means that they aren't always self-aware about how their patterns, their own personality and behavior patterns, parallel those of their abusers, but they do recognize that being mocked when they are sad, or being cheated on, or being betrayed doesn't feel good, and that they get hurt. And that thing we're seeing in that person, that sort of entire experience we're seeing in that person, is narcissistic abuse. In this way, and someone recently asked me this question, so, it's another video we have, is that, can a narcissistic person be trauma bonded? And obviously the answer to that was yes. So, frankly, the trauma bonds of a narcissistic person can be so much more confusing, because I've also found that no matter how much education and support and therapy are offered, people who have their own narcissistic personalities have a really hard time understanding cognitive dissonance where it comes to sort of relationships or justification or any of the rest of it. That makes therapy with people who are narcissistic and simultaneously experiencing narcissistic abuse very difficult. They can really, really get stuck in the anger and the injustice and the vindictiveness of it all. So it's challenging because their pain is real, but so too is their anger and their agitation. Because of this trauma bonding, there's a lot of breaking up and making up, and lots of volatility. And this not only takes a toll on the narcissistic person in the relationship who also is experiencing narcissistic abuse, but in all cases on the people around them, whether that was children, friends, family. But all of those friends were in sort of this big emotional splash zone around the relationship, and often getting caught up and harmed by the drama, the chaos, and the volatility of it all. Remember what makes narcissistic abuse and not just garden variety emotional abuse. That uncanny ability of the narcissistic person to have one face for the public and for getting validation, and then an ability to kind of keep a cap on their rage and anger until they can do it privately or behind closed doors without anyone else or without a larger audience knowing. It's in this way that they can manipulate friends, family, colleagues, judges, cops, you name it. So that same masked two-faced presentation happens in a relationship between two narcissistic people. But because this is on a continuum, there's always going to be one person who has more severe narcissistic behavioral patterns, and that person will likely be the one who then does more harm to the other person. But because they both are constantly, you can't teach narcissists to not go deep, so they're constantly going at each other. When I think about a few scenarios I observed like this, a few were older narcissistic dudes with money who took up with younger, very attractive narcissistic women. The women sometimes were more mild, sometimes comparable. And the women were often sort of in it, because it was they had a comfortable lifestyle, but the women suffered from the ups and downs of the relationship. In another case I was told about, it was a down on his luck narcissistic dude who was with a really well-off narcissistic woman. But he was a vulnerable narcissistic person and used victimhood, passive aggression, and withholding to punish her, a pattern that actually did do a lot of harm to her. And his victimized passive-aggressive behavior was often a byproduct of the shame because she had so much and he had so little. The problem was she was really reactive. So she would constantly be lashing out at him. He would lash back. He would withdraw. She would react more. Messy and exhausting. So short answer, yes, yes, yes. Can people with narcissistic personalities be narcissistically abused? They absolutely can. And I think it's important that anyone who wants to get help for narcissistic abuse step forward. Understand it's not an easy path, and a lot of the path of healing is about humility. And that's sometimes a little bit harder, or a lot a bit harder, for people with these personalities to do. Thanks again.